But before I get into that, we're going to have, like, before each other session, we're going to have some culture. We're going to have some music, and I will turn this over to Mama D now, who's graciously giving up her time. She just came in and said, "Sure, I'll do it for you." She's a good sister and a good comrade, and she will introduce her video first, and then she will sing song live.
This
Go ahead.
is, yeah, thank you. This is Mr. Businessman's Blues, one of three films that premiered at the TIFF Lightbox during the Imaginative Film Festivals. It was also at Sundance, and it was also in the Australian Music Film Festival. So this is me and my Mama D character.
Okay, roll it.
That was 16 lines. Questions, not accusations. And Stewart. This is another song. This is around the genocide around the world, the attack on women and children. This is Elizabeth's favorite song. Well, it's a toss-up now between that and a love song. Many miles from home we're taught in your fine schools that a history book's a weapon, not a tool. In many voices we try to understand what has come upon this land. Many good-intentioned Christians tell us, children, you must listen or they kill us. With the kindness in God's name, they terrorize us. Starry night in a Central American town. Loved ones pray their loved ones won't be found. But in the deepest part of a silent night, shots ring out in the dark. The missing ones will not return. Their killers never caught. It in the paper there's a caption: guerrillas killed in action. But they were children. They were only children. And now their mothers cry. On a dusty road by an olive grove they rest. Young women with babies at their breasts. Upon the souls who went before them lie beneath the earth. An earth made rich with bloodshed, bloodshed before their birth. Said in the TV there's a news flash for victims in the Holy Land. But they were children. They were only children. And all their mothers cry. And it goes on and on. We see it every day. We don't need the paper, and we don't need the news. We all have the answers. We all share, or we all lose. In the capitals of these places they call nations, there are papers pushed and proud congratulations. And while the victimized are criminalized, are laughed at and are lied to, more plans are laid by the death machine. Till these madmen never tire, no, they kneel and they pray to a materialist savior. But they were children. Once they were children. What made their mothers cry? And where are all the children? Where are all the children? Where are all the children? What makes your mother cry? that song is because I was at law school, people were saying that Hitler, he wasn't human, he was a monster. No, the reason he's a real problem, he was a human. Don't ever dismiss his humanity. What was the source of him being the way he was? And I say that because we all started as children. And in the video for that album, there's pictures of all these fascists, and they're baby pictures. And you gotta wonder what's going on in their lives when they came into the world. It's called Compassion.
Okay, thank you very much, sister. Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to go to our panel. And we have 3 speakers today. And our first speaker is going to be Noor Al-Adib. She's the former chair of the Canadian Federation of Students. She has a Bachelor of Arts in Economics, Biology, Women and Gender Studies at U of T, Mississauga. Previously, Noor was president of the UTM Students Union. Okay, and our second speaker, of course, is Jeff Mackler, Comrade Jeff Mackler, who is the National Secretary of Socialist Action USA, a longtime teacher militant, West Coast coordinator of the Campaign for Free Mumia Abu Jamal, and a national steering committee of UNAC, which is the United National Anti-War Coalition. Despite being a very, very shy, who wrote this? Despite being a very shy, soft-spoken person, Jeff is the Socialist Action candidate for President of the United States. All right. There you go. And also, I might add, Jeff is from Oakland, California. Home of the Golden Warriors. So go, Raptors, go! Go, Raptors, go! Okay, and our third
Steph
speaker.
Curry.
What kind of panel is this?
Sorry, is a member of the National Council of Nouveau Parti Anti-Capitalist. I'm ruining this, I'm sure. In France. Listen, I'm a Newfoundlander. I'm bilingual, but unfortunately it's Newfoundlandese and English, not French. And a leader of the current within it, anti-capitalist of revolution. Orlin is a secondary school teacher in Paris, part of the Fédération Syndicale Unitaire, the FSU, Unitary Trade Union Federations, I have my papers now, the largest teacher union in France. With other teacher comrades, he is actively participating in the current strike against the reforms of the Minister of Education in Emmanuel Macron's government. So these are our speakers. And sister, you're first. Go ahead.
I think I'm talented.
Closer.
Yeah, do whatever you need to do with that.
Put it really high and then hit it in and swing it over there. You're just gonna hold it.
Yeah. How's everybody doing today?
Good.
It's a Saturday. It's not raining out yet. It's kind of nice. It will, I know. Thanks for having me, everyone. Like was mentioned, my name's Noor. I'm graduating on Wednesday from U of T, and I can't freaking wait. But I'm really excited to talk to you folks a little bit about what's happening in the student movement now in light of the government with Doug Ford. But what I wanted to do really is first give you folks a lay of the land to better understand what's happening in post-secondary education here in Ontario right now. So in Ontario, we have over 800,000 students. Those are international and domestic students that are in college and university, studying a variety of different things. And we have members from all different walks of life, which is really great. But the average tuition fees right now in Ontario for a full-time undergraduate diploma or program is around $8,000. Jesus is right. $8,000 is a ridiculous amount of money to spend per year. And that's the average, meaning that there are students spending even more than that. And for college students, it's around actually $3,000, which is significantly less than a university degree, but it's still a significant portion that students have to spend because a lot of college students will go to college and then end up going to university after that. So what we're finding with students across Ontario is that debt levels are making it increasingly difficult to be able to really contribute to society and have a good standard of living. A lot of students are unable to afford homes. They can't even think about, paying rent, let alone purchasing homes. I remember the budget came out and they're like, we're going to come up with a strategy about buying homes. Students are not thinking about purchasing homes whatsoever. They're trying to make it from month to month, try to put food on the table, trying to purchase textbooks, all while balancing multiple minimum wage jobs in order to make ends meet. Which ties into the next aspect. When the government rolled back the amazing victories of Bill 148 related to the minimum wage and workers' rights, that really took a hit for students, because now being able to schedule a midterm while trying to commute 2 hours to get to your next class or your next job is nearly impossible. So things also like paying childcare, transit, so many different responsibilities that students have in order to make ends meet, because the reality is we're not living in one dimension. We're not just students. We're parents, we're caregivers, we're workers in so many different things. And because of the reality of cutting public services, a lot of students' mental well-being is deteriorating. And I don't know if you folks know, particularly here at U of T, we have a crisis when it comes to mental health, where we're not actually dealing with the we're dealing with the symptoms, but not dealing with the root of the problem. So what we're seeing is our government and our administrations trying to, bring up band-aid solutions to deal with the problems that students are facing, without understanding that the real problem is increasing tuition fees. We need free education for everybody. The real problem is, not having an affordable housing strategy where everybody has a place to live and able to meet their basic necessities. So again, I really want to emphasize that these are symptoms that we're dealing with. We're not actually dealing with the main problem. And what I want to also mention is, because of our inability to address a lot of, or organize in general, we're seeing a rise of white supremacy. We're seeing a rise of racism, of xenophobia, not just in our communities, but on our campuses as well. Our campuses are really, they're a reflection of what's happening in society. And here at U of T, where we have Jordan Peterson, I'm really ashamed to say that we're campuses that should be, talking about freedom of speech, that we should be campuses that are protecting our freedoms, but in reality, these are the places where we're harboring really terrible people, and that's actually I would say a disease that's actually infecting the rest of our society, which is a shame. So I wanted to paint a larger picture of what's happening, and I'm sure you folks are not new to those realities, but then what we're coupling it with are some really disgusting changes that the government made in January, and even before that, when this government, Doug Ford and his cronies took over, they created this thing called the freedom of speech policy. How many of you folks heard about that? It's actually a fake thing. We do have freedom of speech already. What this government's policy was trying to do is actually embolden people that are really empowered to spread hate speech and to say things that we have fought for generations to say, no, these things are not acceptable. So this was one of the first things that the government did to start their agenda to really squash student activism and really activism around the province. The reason they did this was they don't want students to protest. They don't want us out on the streets saying, no, what you're doing is unacceptable. And because they knew that they were actually going to come in January and make the rest of these announcements. So in January 2019, they announced a couple of different things. First, they announced that they're reducing tuition fees by 10%. So everyone's like, oh, this sounds strange, because this sounds good. There must be something wrong with this. There was something wrong with this. What we tried to do, though, was we tried to claim the 10% tuition fee reduction as a victory. The reason we did that was we don't want the government to come back to us and say, oh, so you were complaining about that? You know what? You're never going to get anything ever again. Well, I don't want anything from the Conservative government, but I want students to feel like actually the work that they're doing is going to result in victories, because when we organize, we win. So that 10% tuition fee reduction was good, but the problem with it was the fact that they didn't actually increase funding to public education. So what this means is that it's going to come at the cost of campus workers. And that's why we're working so close together with campus workers to say, something that happens to you folks that's bad is actually bad for students as well. And we need to be united in that fight, because we can't allow something to happen to workers, because eventually we're going to be those workers. And we all deserve, a standard of living that's good for all. So there was that one aspect. The other aspect that I think the government is not getting away with, but a lot of people don't know about, is the Student Choice Initiative. It's not a choice, that's why they used it. They called it the Student Choice Initiative. But what it is really a policy that allows students to opt out of their student unions. Now, for some of you that may not know, students had organized for years and for decades to actually create student unions because they knew that when we pull resources together, we're actually able to run campaigns, we're actually able to create cost-saving services, we're actually able to create the society that we want because we have the resources that we're pulling together. But what this government did was they knew that there were times and a number of local student unions that we've lost over time. So over the past maybe 5 years, there have been some key student unions across the province that we've lost to right-wing and centrist individuals. And because of that, our student unions have deteriorated in ways that I can't even explain. But what it looks like is less campaigns work on the ground. It's talking about, let's freeze tuition fees instead of let's call for free education because it's possible. It's about actually going against workers on campus and saying, no, we need to put students first, which is actually a really problematic thing. So what this government did was they started meeting with their own individuals, their own supporters, to say, actually, some students don't like their student unions. They don't like that they're political. They don't like that they're calling for free education. And they don't like that we're paying so much tuition fees and still they're taking money and doing nothing for us, which is really, unfortunately, a false statement. But this government used that to justify the Student Choice Initiative and say, we need to give students choice. We need to put the money back in their pockets. My student union fee is $24. I'd rather spend $24 into my students union that's doing work for me than pay the $8,000 that I'm paying in tuition fees when I know you can afford free education. So now what's happening because of that is that we are in constant membership drives now, which means that this government is actually winning because they don't want us working on campaigns. They don't want us holding them accountable. They want us scrambling so much when it comes to making sure that we keep our members. That way we could actually organize and keep our membership dues and do the work that we need to do, that we're not actually focusing on the main issues. And that's why we've, since January, have been trying to focus on this campaign called We the Students. And the We the Students campaign isn't, I wouldn't say it's as strong a campaign name as maybe Fight the Fees, but what it gave a lot of our members that haven't been involved in a lot of our work is this sense of unity and the sense that they're actually a part of something larger. They say, we the students can actually work on these issues. We the students can fight back this government. And it's amazing to see a lot of students who have never been engaged in activist work or any type of work actually feel like they're a part of something larger. And that's something that we've been struggling over the past few years, where a lot of people say, my students union, they're too activisty, I don't want to be involved in that. They're too much this, they're too much that. We need to make sure that every member feels like they're a part of this union. That way we can actually organize and win. Now, other aspects of their announcement that I'm not going to get too much into, but just so you folks know, were major cuts to the Ontario Student Assistance Program. Over $670 million being cut from financial aid, which we know means that students are actually going to have to pay more tuition fees, they're going to graduate with more debt, and it just continues that vicious cycle of not being able to, have a good standard of living. We're going to constantly be stuck paying off that debt. Another aspect of what the government announced was something called performance-based funding. Performance-based funding is shit. Let me tell you why. The reason is that they're actually going to a more capitalist way of assessing funding for institutions by saying, what type of companies are you working with? What type of research are you coming out with? Are you graduating and getting a job? Who are you getting a job with? And if we value, we as in the government, if we think they're good business partners, then your institution will get more money for it. What that means is we're actually going to see some really important programs be cut because they don't see it as valuable, because they don't see it as a return on their investment, because it doesn't come up with big money like business or economics or any of those programs, which is a very scary thing for us. And that it actually goes against the whole institution of education. It's about the pursuit of knowledge. It's about curiosity-based learning. And I think that's something that we need to keep our finger on and pay attention to, because over the next few years, those are the things we need to be talking about. But since these announcements have been made, what students have been doing are organizing in the streets. They've been organizing rallies and sit-ins and walkouts and leafleting and doing town halls, letter writing, petition collections. We've collected over 16,000 physical petitions, which is amazing, because oftentimes people try to do the change.org online, which is great. But to me, 16,000 physical petitions means 16,000 conversations that you're having with people. That way you can debunk myths that they're reading online. That way you're creating that connection so you can engage them in future actions and actually get them activated and involved in the work that we're doing. On top of that, and that really goes to our social media strategy. Our social media, this is a plug-in, go follow us on social media at CFS Ontario. You can see some of the great work that we're doing to really talk about what it means to be a student in 2019. We're showcasing the lives of students right now, but not just students right now at university and colleges, but high school students who are also talking about the cuts to education and what this will mean for them. Because what we want to do is create an intergenerational conversation about the value of post-secondary education. And that's really important, not just on the ground, but on social media, where a lot of young activists are really plugged in on Instagram. I'm really new to Instagram. I don't know how the hell to use it, but I need to learn. And maybe all of us in this room need to learn as well, because there are so many avenues for us to engage people. The other aspect of what I wanted to talk about is the fact that I want our members to be here. We have over 350,000 members across the province. I want them to be here. But right now, they're right here, and that's okay. But I think that goes to say that we need to actually meet people where they're at. We need to be talking about these issues in a way that's actually digestible. Because sometimes I can sit there and talk about the funding formula for hours and hours and hours on end. But if it's not something that somebody can pick up really easily and understand why it's important to understand the funding formula, we're actually going to lose a lot of people. And I think that's some of the things that maybe our organization can do better, is that we can't leave anybody behind. In this fight against Doug Ford and his regressive government, not just around education, we need to be bringing people along in so many different ways. And the only way we could do that is meeting them where they're at. One of the things that I've been learning from other people is, I know individuals, organizers who have been meeting with people who voted for Doug Ford. And there was probably a point in time where I was like, I would never do that. Why the hell would I sit across from somebody who voted for Doug Ford? And what I realized was, the reality is that a lot of those people didn't actually know who he was and what he's about. And that's actually a sad thing on my part for me to say, no, I'm not going to engage with somebody, when in reality, those are the people I need to be talking to. Those are the people that I need to be engaging and understanding and challenging, and then showing them a different way on what's possible. So with that being said, one of the things that our organization is working on, and I would really encourage you folks to check out, is this summer and into the fall, we're actually hosting activist assemblies. Usually we host one symposium during the summer for people who are elected, but what we realized was it can't just be elected representatives at our students' unions coming out and learning these skills. We have to go back to our campuses and pull in different types of people who can learn transferable skills. Because I'll be honest with you, when I first got involved, I only probably learned from a few people who were willing to teach me. And that's part of the problem, is that if we're not willing to teach each other and transfer those skills, we're not building a movement. It's actually just a popularity contest, and I'm not about that. Popularity contests don't win. We need to be building people into our movements. So our activist assemblies will be from everything, A to Z, about what it means to organize, what it means to have an education system that's free, because we need to be talking about that information and create that world for ourselves. We're also building a lot of coalitions. We're working with labor, we're working with education groups, we're working with so many different people that I probably would have never imagined us working with. But it's important to create those bonds and those relationships, because what we need to show this government is that they're not for the people, we're for the people, and we know what we need, and we're going to show you that way, whether you're in government or not. So, well, we're also creating our campus ambassador system. So out of curiosity, how many of you folks work on campus or are students or anything like that?
What about professors?
Professors as well, yeah. You folks are important. Wicked. I need you folks to go back to campus and pull different types of people and be campus ambassadors and show up to different events and talk about this issue, because the reality is that, say at U of T, where we have over 50,000 students, I can't say 50,000 students know what's going on. And when we're talking about our professors and our instructors and staff and workers on campus who will be impacted by this, can we confidently say that they all know what's going on? No, but we're all going to be impacted by this. So I want to encourage you folks to go out to people that you've never talked to before and talk to them about what's going on in our education system. Because what I also want folks to know is that what's happening right now in the student movement...
3 minutes.
Thank you. What's happening in the student movement right now is going to go to labor. This is a testing ground. This government's trying to see, like, oh, will a lot of people, rise up and say they're not okay with this? Then you know what? We'll move on to labor next, because they're also a pain in our ass and we need to get rid of them, and this is the way to do it. So there's a number of ways that we can do that, but what I want to tell you is that we need to pull in people who can make decisions for themselves, who could buy into this work and feel like they're a part of something larger, and actually run these campaigns, because we know organizing wins. We've learned a lot of lessons from New Zealand and in the United States, where they've dealt with the right to work legislation in the United States. And in New Zealand, they actually had a similar policy that completely demolished their student movement. Now I think there's around 3 student unions that are actually active in New Zealand. We're trying to learn as much from them, but I'm telling you, the thing that they've told us the most is get on the ground and talk to people, build connections. We need to be doing that work. But what I also want to tell you folks is that we've been listening to a lot of our members who have said, is there a legal challenge? Is there a legal update? Is there a way we could sue this government? Probably a week and a half ago, we actually filed to challenge the government on this situation, to say that you folks didn't actually try to provide students choice. You actually did this with malicious intent. You called us crazy Marxist nonsense. It's not crazy Marxist nonsense to want better for each other. But what we do know is that this government doesn't like us because of the work that we do. And the government isn't actually allowed to implement policies because they don't like a group. That makes a really bad government. So just so you folks know, that is happening, that is in the works. You folks should stay updated and spread the word. That way you can tell people what's going on. And we're trying to use all the tools in our toolbox. That way we could push back on this policy, because student unions need to exist so we can continue to do this work. Some things on the horizon: the federal election. It's going to be really bad. But it's going to be really good if we're the ones out on the streets and we're organizing. That way we're educating folks about how to vote, where to vote, why you should vote, what are the issues that are happening. And this has actually, the Federation has worked on this. In 2015, we saw a massive increase in youth voter turnout because we're trying to break down the barriers for students to vote. They're not apathetic. We just need to get rid of the situations and things that actually get in their way from actually participating in this so-called democracy. So I wanted you folks to know about all these different things that we're working on. That way I can answer any of your questions, but also talk to you folks about how you can get involved, because you folks play an equal part in this conversation. This is not just a student issue. This is an issue that's going to impact all of us. And I really look forward to talking about some of the next steps with you all about how to do that. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jeff.
Do you want the stand, Jeff? Are you good to hold it, or are you?
Is this person left? Can I make notes on this paper?
Yeah.
I'd like to begin with a Marxist analysis of the NBA championship. The sheer idea.
Sorry, comrade, your time's up.
The sheer idea that a lesser imperialist country could challenge our great behemoth in the United States, as you all know, is folly. But anyway, I want you to know that I was a Brooklyn Dodger fan, and my hero at that time was Jackie Robinson. How many of you heard of him? I was one of those kids that leaned over the dugout at Ebbets Field and said, "Jackie, sign my program." And my baseball swing was an imitation of his. Now I want to tell you about Steph Curry. Okay, enough of this. In thinking what I could say about the revolt, I want to talk about the Red State teacher strikes. These took everyone by surprise in the United States, including me. I spent 20 years as a teacher union organizer in New York City and in California. I held many posts. And in California, we have 1,100 school districts. And I led the second strike in the state's history in 1973. Imagine, we struck one strike, one school district, and the other 1,100, there was no strike. It was a radicalization, and the American capitalist class was prosperous. They could conduct a war in Vietnam and triple the money that went into public education. There was a massive expansion, and the school district settled with us and gave us the first contract after one day on strike. That's not the case anymore. Capitalism in crisis is a different enemy. But I do live in Oakland, and I mentioned from the floor that when 3 women hotel workers stood up in 1946 and were beaten by the cops, it led to a general strike that was victorious, that ended up having the entire labor movement run a slate based on a workers' party against the Democrats and Republicans, and they took over the city council. Now, you can't understand that unless you understand the context. The context was the American working class had been slapped by a wage freeze for the duration of World War II. The United States needed a war to get out of the Great Depression. The Stalinists supported the wage freeze as patriots. And in 1946, the largest strike wave in the history of the United States took place, with 6 million people on strike across the country, larger than the 1930s. So the 46 strike can't be explained without the context of a crisis of a system that had frozen the wages and driven workers into poverty. It's the same thing with 1917. It started with a demonstration of women whose companions were at the front and who were starving. A whole nation was starving. You can't understand the Russian Revolution unless you understand its context. So what happened in West Virginia and the other 5 states to a greater or lesser extent? The first thing is that it took place in the context of a crisis of capitalism, wherein the state legislature over the previous 10 years gutted the education budgets and gifted the money directly to the capitalist class and its institutions and corporations. And the teachers, who had some budget experts, were aware of this, and they had one basic demand. We want you to take all the money you've stolen from the working class over 10 years, and here's the figure in the billions, from the rich, the corporations, the tax concessions, and give it to the teachers. But they didn't just say the teachers. They said give it to public education. They didn't just say public education, they said all public employees, whether they're members of our union or not. That was a shock. And then they said, we're going on strike. Not for one day, not a demonstration strike, but forever, until you meet our demand. That was quite a shock. They were immediately counseled by their leaders in the National Education Association, the AFT, and the American Federation of Teachers, that this was dangerous, that this was impossible, that you can't fight state legislature, that there is no money, et cetera, and they ignored the national leaders of the unions, who had become accustomed to a strike method as follows. You go out on strike in one school district says they have no money. This is in California and everywhere else in the country. And you go out for a week, and if you don't have the settlement, the national AFT or NEA leadership comes to your local and says, listen, it's one thing to go out on strike, it's another thing to get back in. And they force the teachers to sign all kinds of concessionary agreements, humiliating agreements, which they declare were victories, and they win nothing. And that's been the pattern. So for the West Virginia teachers, to set this example was a shock. If you were going to start with a, quote, Marxist analysis, you would say, well, what the hell are teachers anyway? What's their relationship to the means of production? Can they stop capitalist profits? The answer is absolutely not. In the abstract, if they strike one school district. But the West Virginia teachers gave a different definition to teachers and public employees. They served as a spark plug to awaken the entire working class to the power that they had. The reason why millions demonstrated in every city in West Virginia was because the teachers were on strike literally for them, for their schools, for the kids, against a racist school-to-prison scenario, and for teacher power. And what did they do about the leadership of the NEA and AFT, who counseled accept the contract, lobby the state legislature, or turn to the elections in the midterms? They listened politely and basically ignored the national leadership. And they developed their own testing ground. They started out with walk-ins. They all wore t-shirts, red t-shirts, and walked into the schools collectively. Modest, but they organized it statewide. And everybody walked in together saying, we're in now, but we'll be out tomorrow. And they tested and they did polls and they used social media in a big way until they determined that they had the support of the overwhelming numbers of the teachers and their communities and their parents and the black communities and the whole labor movement. The capitalists normally say, well, let the teachers go out on strike as long as they want. We don't give a shit if the kids don't get an education. We don't need educated kids anyway. We need machines, a couple of robots and computers and low wage. They view the prison to scenario where they spend more money in the United States on prisons than they do on building schools. That's the norm. When I said 7 million people are under the jurisdiction of the prison industrial complex in the United States, that's the highest number and percentage in the world. We have more people on death row than any nation on the planet. Mass incarceration is the norm in capitalist America. So what's different was they used the full power of the teachers statewide. They organized local and statewide demonstrations at the legislature. Their demands to restore the cuts were unconditional. Either you do it or we stay out forever. That scared the ruling class. United all public employees, including non-teachers. Imagine teachers saying, give money to all the public employees that you've stolen from them, not just us, but everyone. When the state legislature said, teachers, you're violating the law, the teachers said, politely, fuck you. And they ignored bourgeois law. Teacher strikes are illegal. And they said, come and get us. And the ruling class had a choice, because if they tried to arrest one teacher, they would have started up a shitstorm that would be unbelievable, because the whole working class was behind them. So they broke capitalist law. They organized statewide mobilizations. They sent their representatives to all the school districts and labor unions and everywhere else to say, we need your help. This is for you and for us. A couple of them came to California. We had a meeting at Oakland High, where 600 teachers who were preparing to go on strike. We struck in Oakland, and we struck in Los Angeles. And the leaders there, as militant sounding as they were, and as much as they said, we're striking for the kids, we're striking for smaller class size, they really followed the national AFT and NEA norms. They struck for a week and went back with concessionary contracts and a promise from the charter-oriented corporate school board leaders that they would lobby the state legislature to cut back on charter schools. Do you know what charter schools are? Yeah. Privatized public education for the rich corporations. Los Angeles has 20% of the school district, it's the second largest district in the state, privatized. And Oakland has 30%. The teachers did not win a single concession on that. They have 1,100 school districts in California. They struck too. and they end up promising that they were going to go to the state legislatures. So there's a qualitative difference between the two California strikes, and now Union City is out on strike, than West Virginia. Qualitative, although the leadership of the OEA, Oakland Education Association, and United Teachers of Los Angeles, claims that they were doing good things, and on that basis won over the parents. Their final settlements reduced class size by 1. And LA had the worst class size ratios you can imagine. They had at one point a class size maximum of like 43 students in a class. Most school districts are around 34 for high school. So LA reduction of 1 was meaningless. So what lesson can we learn from the from the West Virginia and the other strikes that followed? Some with equal militancy, some for less duration. Well, they made one big mistake. They said, we've won this victory, and now they decided nationally that the AFT and the NEA were going to run 400 teachers for election to the Congress and other offices in the United States. They all ran as Democrats. And that was a catastrophe. It showed the contradiction in consciousness. On the one hand, they understood what to do when the power was with their hands and on the picket lines challenging the legislature. But they hadn't reached that level of maturity, or did they have the level of leadership that they would use it to form their own party, to inspire the labor movement that a united working class can win in the political arena and can complement their struggle in the political arena at the point of production. So they won a few people, all of whom were Democrats, most of them corporate Democrats. Actually, there's no other definition of Democrat, but corporate Democrat, including the new ones like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. How many of you heard of her?
Yeah.
Did you know that in the midterm election, she supported the entire Democratic Party slate, whether they were the Southern racist blue dog Democrats, the moderates, the conservatives? She supported every Democrat across the board.
Same.
And the same with most all of them. So, what conclusions can we draw? Oh, by the way, the central leadership of the West Virginia strikers were women.
Of course. Oh, sorry.
They were women, low paid, angry, and in a profession where the country devalues public education and puts women in those jobs and forces women on the jobs to take up non-teaching responsibilities like childcare, preschool, service, lunch hour, all the rest. And they were angry and raised those issues. And they won on a number of them. But the main dynamic that I want to leave you with for the teachers is they broke every rule in the book. They broke the so-called Marxist rule that you have to be at the point of production. They broke the rule that you can win by yourself. They broke the rule that you can't defy capitalist laws. They broke the rule that said the bureaucracy is the leadership and you have to respect their decision. And by doing that, they inspired the entire state and forced the capitalist class as a whole in those states to back off.
5 minutes.
Because if they didn't back off, the threat was too great. It reminds me of a teacher union, of a Teamsters strike with Ron Kerry. Do you remember when he was elected to the Teamsters, and he organized a national strike, and it was an unknown quantity. Closed down the whole trucking industry, and the bourgeoisie had to say, how far do we want to push this guy? We don't know what he's made of in his leadership core and the Teamsters for Democratic Union, so they let it go. And he signed a contract. There was a victory for Teamsters across the board, But then the bourgeoisie went after him and virtually lynched him, threw him out of the union, changed the whole leadership, back the old Hoffa slate, and the gains were nil. And TDU fell apart over it, didn't have the courage to stand up to the government over the frame-up charges of Ron Kerry, the head of the Teamsters Union. Today, in my view, the capitalist crisis, as the previous panelists and discussion revealed, is extremely deep. The majority of youth under 30 in the United States indicate in poll after poll conducted by Gallup, the Pew Organization, the New York Times, that young people prefer socialism over capitalism under 30. In the black population, it's 58%. It's the entire of the whole black population. Because socialism to them, it's unclear what is meant by it, but socialism to them is a vision of a world with equality and social welfare and education and health care and all the other things. So today, when I go over to someone in the street and I try to sell them a copy of our newspaper, Socialist Action, they look at me and they say, well, what is socialism anyway? And I said, well, look, you and I, this is a demonstration for women's rights or for the environment or anywhere we go from Lumia. And I said, well, you know, you and I probably agree on the fundamentals. We're against racism, poverty, union busting, environmental destruction, endless wars, the prison-industrial complex, sexism, homophobia, attacks on transgender people. We all agree on that. The only difference we might have is that we think that none of these evils are accidental, that can be remedied by electing one or another capitalist candidate. We think the system is inherently racist, homophobic, sexist. And everybody says, yeah, I agree with that. And then I say, by the way, I'm running for president of the United States. and they say, really, I'll vote for you. Really, I'll vote for you. I mean, I'm against all those things, and the capitalists are for the other side. The capitalists have no choice but to deepen their attacks on us on every front, and they do, to the point where the average student debt in the United States, in US dollars, not Canadian, is like $25,000, and it's unpayable for young people, and they see themselves as being robbed of a future regarding jobs,
1 minute.
employment, graduate school, or whatever, even getting through school. Something like 80% of the community college kids, 2-year schools, never make it through 2 years. They go into the workforce as low-wage labor. So these are explosive times. Brian said that it's the worst times for the socialist movement. They're at a low ebb. And he's right, and he's wrong. He's right in the sense that many of the other organizations who I call centrist, social democrat, have literally disintegrated. The ISO, for example, had 1,000 members 2 months ago at 0. They dissolved the entire organization. Socialist Alternative, which elected a city council member in Seattle, ended up supporting 7 Democrats and collected 60,000 signatures for Bernie Sanders. They lost hundreds and hundreds of people. The Stalinist organizations have lost or expelled hundreds of people because all of them were socialist, quote, reformists, Green Party socialists, Bernie Sanders socialists. Or with the DSA, they took an internal poll, which something like 25% responded to, and it was 78%, 75% for Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is no socialist, although he popularized the word socialist, which is good. We took advantage of that. Today, the Democrats are running 23 people for President of the United States in the primary. And Trump fucking moron, and I told you that. And that's not my words, that's the Secretary of State's definition. Tillerson literally said, and quoted, that Trump is a fucking moron when he told the National Security Council that we have to increase tactical nuclear weapons by 100-fold. Not 100% double, but 100-fold. Like 100 times more tactical weapons. Everybody in the United States knows literally that Trump is a moron. But is he any more of a moron than the others? Like George Bush, or Richard Nixon, or Ronald Reagan, Hollywood actor. George ran a baseball team. No. The truth of the matter is that they don't run the United States. The President of the United States doesn't run the United States. The United States is run by the capitalist class. They own the wealth, and the entire Congress and Senate they're paid representatives. They're all millionaires. They all get lobbied or are owned by the corporations. They write the tax codes, where the vast numbers of the largest corporations don't pay any taxes. They shift the burden. They all profit and vote unanimously for the war budget. $1 trillion, it was virtually unanimous, including Bernie Sanders. $1 trillion a year for the war budget. They all support the U.S. monstrosity in Venezuela, the coup, but they all supported every other coup and imperialist intervention in American history, whether it be the invasion of Guatemala, throwing out the President 54, the Iran where they threw out Mohammed Mossadegh, Vietnam where they killed 4 million people in a 10-year war, the slaughters in all the Middle Eastern countries, the installation of
30
dictators.
seconds,
They killed, with U.S. help, 10 million people in the Congo in the last 10 years because it's the richest country in the Congo in regard to minerals. If you go through the interventions, and there are hundreds, what they're doing in Venezuela openly, with Trump and Pompano bragging about regime change. Can I take one more minute and tell you about the embassy?
No, you can't. You're a warrior.
Okay. Just imagine.
Challenge the chair.
One more minute.
Listen, I sacrificed an awful lot to get here and miss the Warrior game tomorrow. I'm really hoping for a comeback, but I have to get on the plane when the Warriors are
You're
about
burning up
to.
your minutes.
The
Your time's up. 1 minute. 1 minute.
Here you imagine, our friends, literally personal friends, Kevin Zeese and the others, Medea Benjamin, are occupied last week the Venezuelan embassy. And the United States says they waited 34 days until they did anything. They could have broken into that thing and arrested them right away. Why did they wait 34 days? Because the United States insisted that they recognized Venezuela, except not the president. They recognized this puppet fool, Juan Guaido. But if they recognize Venezuela, it's hard for them to say that that they could violate the sanctity of the embassy, which is protected by the Geneva Convention and a million other laws. You can't enter another country's embassy. But they did. And Kevin Zeese and the others are going to go into court in a few days, and they're going to fight it. And they're going to say, we were there representing the official government of Venezuela with their approval and Maduro's approval. Now, can you imagine if the United States appeals this and brings it up to the U.S. Supreme Court? And the Supreme Court rules, well, the truth is the United States has the right to appoint presidents in any country. We haven't gotten to that point, but that's why they waited for 34 days, because there was no justification in law, and there has never been a justification for any of the imperialist slaughters that the behemoth country, not the lesser Toronto Raptors, never been a legal reason for anything they do other than to protect the rapacious interests of the ruling class. I have to say I'm thrilled to death that this is the greatest audience and group I've seen and here many times. This whole layer of young people that you've recruited is our revolutionary future. You're doing great. We're proud to be your sister party. Thank you.
Okay, Jeff, you're forgiven.
Breaking news.
Okay, come.
Breaking news. The U.S. Embassy in Honduras is on fire right now. And the grassroots have taken over and they've...
The U.S. Embassy in Honduras. Honduras is on fire.
burning now.
To the
The
ground.
anti-American,
Oh my God.
anti-imperial movement.
Okay, all right, okay, go ahead, comrade.
Okay. Excuse me for my horrible accent, but as you know, French are very bad in foreign language, especially in English. But I will try to speak in English. It's an honor for me to speak in this conference. And I think this conference proves that internationalism, the real internationalism, proletarian internationalism, is real and very current. So since 2016, our country, France, is marked by deep social movements. This year, the movement called Yellow Jackets has deeply marked the political and social situation. Less than 2 years after the election of Emmanuel Macron, thousands and thousands of people parade each week demanding his resignation. Last July, the Benalla case proved that the government used private militia to beat protesters. On this occasion, Emmanuel Macron has said, "Come and get me." Today, thousands protesters each week go to the Champs-Élysées towards the presidential palace and they cry, "Macron, we come to get you at your home." Each week, thousands youth, employees, workers fight against the police. In December and January, insurgent demonstrations took place in Paris on the Champs-Élysées, the most beautiful avenue of the bourgeois world. Faced with these demonstrations, the government unleashed an extraordinary and brutal repression. The official numbers, the numbers of the government, are huge. More than 3,000 injured, more than 10,000 police guards, 800 people are in jail, 13,000 shots of LBD, the LBD it's a new flashball, and more than 1,500 shots of gas grenade. I cannot do this count without a special mention for Zineb Redouane, an old lady killed in Marseille in her apartment by a grenade shot by the police. She was not a protester. She was in her apartment and she closed her shutters and she was killed by a grenade shot by the police. This is not in Russia. This is not in North Korea. This is not in Algeria. This is in France, a bourgeois democratic republic. This is the real face of the bourgeoisie.
Yeah.
So the Yellow Jacket movement is another symptom of the content social anger. The labor movement leadership, alongside those who spent their time arguing that it had no steam and that we were overestimating the actual scale of the struggles, were heavily mistaken. The Yellow Jackets movement is a continuation of the opened in 2016 during the mobilization against the labor law of the Hollande government. Since 2016, struggles followed each other. Last year, the railway sector and the youth went on strike against the government policy, but the strikes lost because of betrayals of the bureaucracy. The determination of the Yellow Jackets is a lesson for the cowardly leadership of the labor movement. The betrayals of the trade union bureaucracies and the inability of the left wing of these unions to converge the different struggles has provoked hostility towards the organized labor movement. So, there is a great danger that radicalization will lead to radicalization on the right. The results of the European elections last week are a warning for us. The abstention is still important, but whereas the new anti-capitalist party was unable to present an electoral list, and that Lutte Ouvrière, it's another Trotskyist organization in France, Lutte Ouvrière gets less than 1% of the votes. In the same time, the Rassemblement National of Marine Le Pen, it's the greatest far-right party in France. They are the first party with 23% of the votes. This is not a surprise. During the Yellow Jackets mobilization, many things have shown the progress of reactionary ideas in the population. In November, in the Department of the North, Yellow Jackets stopped a truck carrying immigrants and deported and reported them to the police. In January, the procession of the new anti-capitalist party in Paris was attacked by right-wing activists with stones and sticks. Similar attacks took place in Lyon and Toulouse. None of the leaders of the Yellow Jacket condemned these attacks. At the same time, the main claim of the Yellow Jackets was a referendum issue. They call this the Popular Initiative Referendum. It's a bourgeois democratic slogan, often defended by figures close to the far right. None of the claims of the Yellow Jacket challenges the power of capitalists. Yellow Jackets organized demonstrations towards the presidential palace in front of the building of the mass media, but never towards the building of the MEDEF, the Union of the French Capitalists. So, for us, as revolutionary Marxists, the Yellow Jacket movement is typically an interclassist movement. We must intervene in this movement as workers' activists. One of the most important difficulties in this movement is the incapacity of the left of the labor movement to build a class pole. Many of these left activists were demonstrating on Saturday with Yellow Jacket, but they did it individually without trying to regroup our class strengths. Thus, with comrades of the new anti-capitalist party and other activists, we tried to intervene during the Saturday demonstration as a social force. So, with the strikers of the postal sector, we organized the procession of the Social Front, and we called other leftist organizations to build a class pole inside the demonstration of the Yellow Jackets. We do not hide our class flag behind a yellow jacket. it's a great mistake to think that we can influence this movement by dissolving ourselves in. But it's not enough to decide how to appear in Saturday's protest. We have to make sure that the determination of the Yellow Jackets finds an echo in the combative sectors of the labor movement. To be able to influence the Yellow Jacket, we must ourselves be able to regroup our forces and demonstrate that we can put a stop to the employer's policy. As I am speaking, in France, many strikes take place in different sectors of the working class. In the public education, many teachers struggle for 3 months against the destructive reforms of the government. For the first time in history, teachers' unions call for a strike during exams. In the public hospital, strikes multiply in the country. Next Tuesday, unions of railway sectors call for a strike. The public service unions were also forced under pressure to call for strike the same day. This may be a new step in the class struggle in our country. But we need to have political intervention in this situation in order to try to federate the most combative sectors of the working class: Yellow Jackets, radical unionists, youth, etc. This is the way to put a stop to capitalist policies and reinforce our camp, the camp of working class, the camp of exploited and oppressed people. The capitalists want to crush us. They want to crush the hope of all those men and women who are fighting for a better world. But I won't finish with this song sung by many strikers and many Yellow Jackets. In English, this song means, we are here, even if you don't want, we are here, for the honor of the workers, for a better world, even if you don't want, we are here. On est là, même si vous ne voulez pas, nous on est là. Pour l'honneur des travailleurs et pour un monde meilleur, même si vous ne voulez pas, nous on est là. On est là, même si vous ne voulez pas, nous on est là. Pour l'honneur des travailleurs et pour un monde meilleur, même si vous ne voulez pas, nous on est là. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, comrades. Okay, so now, let's see, it's 20 after 5, so we're not going to have a long list, but we are going to take speakers, and I'm going to keep everybody to their 3 minutes. Just a second. Okay.
I tried to get them to you when you started.
Okay, I have 3 so far. Julius.
Thank you for
And
the,
we will come, sorry, Julius, we
Yep.
will take some questions first, and then we will come back to the panel.
thank you for the great presentations, all 3 of you. They're fantastic. I guess, what's happening today is really that the rise of populism is playing a major role in what's happening, which is due to the crisis of capitalism. And what I'd like to know is, and you touched on this a little bit, Aurélien, is the rise of the right wing. The Yellow Vest movement of France is a populist movement. In Canada, it has taken the form of a movement on the far right, of anti-immigration, pro-oil, Alberta, and it has attached itself to the blue-collar worker in that part of the country, and is spreading, I think, or it has spread. Maybe it's stalled a bit. But I think this goes back to the issue of the role of labor unions to fight for the interests of the working class. And when the labor leadership does not step up to the task, the far right is always there. They're always there to try to harness the anger and frustration of working people, and that's why it's so important for socialists and the left to be engaged in the workers' movement, to challenge the status quo, to challenge the labor bureaucracy, and to offer a vision for a different world that fights, a movement that fights for gains, but really that challenges the system as a whole. And I guess I just wanted to hear what the panelists think of that. The rise of the right wing, and basically it seems like it's a vacuum that the right is filling, and we need to step up our game.
Okay. Miguel? Right behind you, Miguel.
So thank you for your presentations. I wanted to address Noor for the first. I was just wondering if, you mentioned that there were some movements around, like in New Zealand and in the United States, I think, that they were showing some solidarity with you. Just a quick question of curiosity. Did you hear anything from the Quebec student movements in 2012? Because I was sort of indirectly, I was actually part of it, but not as a leader, but just, anyways, just wondering if you had heard of them and anything like that. And what you're doing is really awesome, and I incredibly respect you for what you're doing. So that's the first thing I wanted to tell. Second thing is, can I ask a question in French? Is that okay? And I'll try to translate very quickly.
Of course.
Ok. Donc, camarade Aurélie, merci d'être venu ici au Canada. J'espère que mon accent va pouvoir, il sera pas trop fort, en tout cas. Donc, je voulais juste savoir un peu le mouvement anticapitaliste que vous faites partie. Je voulais juste un peu comprendre vos demandes un petit peu plus de manière précise, et je voulais savoir aussi le rôle que vous voulez jouer plus précisément dans le rôle des vestes jaunes. Et donc là, Julius a fait le point que les vestes jaunes c'est une gang de personnes de la droite extrémistes, en tout cas, tout régressif, tout ce que tu veux. Puis je me demande s'il y a ce même problème-là en France. J'imagine que oui, mais je voulais juste avoir des précisions de ta part par rapport à cette question-là. Et tu avais mentionné aussi que vous vouliez comme réveiller la conscience ouvrière en France. Et je me demandais qu'est-ce que vous faisiez par rapport à ça. Et est-ce qu'il y a quand même une conscience ouvrière, ou c'est juste indirect, ou c'est un peu comme éparpillé? Est-ce qu'il y a une cohésion quand même si c'est pas exactement conscient de la manière que nous on le fait? Est-ce que c'est la même chose en France? Okay, so should I translate that more? Yeah, I'll try to translate
Sure, you
that.
have about a minute.
I'll go as quickly as I can for that. So basically what I asked Aurélien here is what are their demands, and how are they going to get involved within the Yellow Vest Party, or movement I should say, and how do they plan on getting involved with them more specifically. And the second question I had for him was, are they planning to, is there like a right-wing regressive force within the Yellow Vests, or is it more so a populist left kind of movement? And
30 seconds.
Okay. And also I asked about the class consciousness. He spoke briefly about the spark of the class consciousness within the Yellow Vests, and I was just wondering how cohesive was it, and whether they're trying to spark that, or basically the basic assessment of that, the class consciousness in the Yellow Vests. So that's it.
Thank you. Okay, our next speaker is Mama D, right here.
Thank you for your presentations. Merci beaucoup. I guess what I'm hearing is people that can talk to each other who have the same inclinations. And what you raise, and this is where you and I are going to get together after this and we're going to exchange information, is how do we talk to people that we don't agree with? Now, little self-promotion here. I offer a 7-hour, my partner and I offer a 7-hour workshop on exactly how to do this. We offer the theoretical background on people's motivation at a psychic and emotional level on the fear issue. We use the traditional teachings, like I said earlier, and we actually do role play on calling in as opposed to calling out. We do this, we do a lot of practice. We do this 7-hour workshop, and we should talk about this. And we have a 3-day workshop we're developing for HR departments in order to do this, because we're out on the street, we can talk to each other. The real trick is to talk and de-escalate and then call somebody in. Because one of the needs that drives people to fear from very early ages is the need to be heard. And that's exactly why Trump got elected. It's because there's a whole lot of people who had a need to be heard, and they weren't being heard. And he, whether he gives a damn about them or not, he made them feel like they were heard. And that's significant. And this is why I'm saying that the leadership, and this is why specifically to my sister there, is that let's work together on this, because we actually have a skill set that nobody else is providing on how to skills to actually allow people to think, to feel, and to be really heard, and then have the conversation from there. They're called Decolonizing the Heart. I have cards here. The first one is on the 15th of, the second one is on the 15th of June. $75 or pay what you can. The other thing is, I think we should all sign up and go to the Ford Fest on Saturday, June the 22nd. That we get these skills and we all show up and we go there.
Our teachers.
Yeah, you can sign up online, fordfest.ca. I think we should, with these skills, or if you don't have the skills that I'm sharing because you haven't been to the workshop, just promise to always say, thank you. That's very interesting. Instead of getting into a fight with them. Because actually they're going to dig in deeper. And we should all go to the Ford Fest.
Okay, thank you very much. Christian.
Especially with dump the Thug Ford sign.
You're not with us yet?
I don't feel I would make a lot of friends there, but you never know. So I just graduated not too long ago, so this really touched on a lot of things I think about, and I just wanted to. This isn't really my main question, but I did want to bring it up. It's funny because at the time when this happened, I wasn't as left-wing as many in this room would like when this happened, but the Marxist Party at the college I went to actually managed to get a bus pass as part of our tuition, and they weren't a lot of people, but it was really amazing. Those few people were able to put the fires down to get that passed in our school. So I just wanted to bring up that success that happened 1 or 2 years ago now, because Algonquin was the only school in Ottawa that didn't have a bus pass. You just had to really pay for it. It's like $100 a month, which is a lot for a student. Yeah, so I getting past it though, the question I wanted to get to though was, so you brought up, I suppose, that there's not really maybe I'm misunderstanding this, so sorry if I am. There's no, education doesn't really have a relation to capital in a traditional Marxist critique per se. Maybe I'm misunderstanding of that. So then, I wonder then if that's the reason we're really seeing, as you brought up, this push to reevaluate education as its ability to generate capital, and just sort of how we can, I guess, address that kind of transition and sort of the dangers and pitfalls that might bring forward in the future, because I really see that as really undermining some of the potential for education to really benefit society.
Okay, so we're going to come back to our panel. Each going to have 4 minutes to answer any of, yes, I'll get you on the list next time, any of the questions or intervention if they want to speak to. 4 minutes, so Jeff, you're on. And it's 4 minutes. You hear me, Jeff? 4 minutes.
How much again?
She is reminding the greater imperialist that the lesser imperialists
Whose country are you in, Jeff?
are going going to impose strict time limits on it.
They ain't hope, right?
As far as the rise of the right in the United States, it's contradictory. There are angry workers out there, and the Democrats have betrayed them. And the Democrats are trying to figure out what lies would best fit the moods of the people to get their corporate representatives a greater share of the wealth that they all steal. But, for example, in Berkeley, the fascists announced that they were going to come over and take over the People's Republic of Berkeley. And they announced a big march, and 5 of them showed up and 7,000 on our side. And then they moved on to San Francisco, and a dozen or two showed up, and 10,000 showed up, led by the Longshore Union. So in the Bay Area, and most of the rest of the places, even in the worst variants, the fascist mobilizations have never reached anything resembling a mass proportion. Whereas the anti-fascist demonstration, we had 10 fascists in Boston and 50,000 mobilized against them. That gives you an idea of the relative relationship of forces. Now that's not to say that Trump's rallies don't go into the thousands and they cheer him. He tries to put on an establishment, view as opposed to Hillary Clinton, who is getting $150,000 a lecture from the Wall Street bankers in New York City. So the Democrats are trying to figure how to take this mass sentiment that I referred to and channel it back into the Democratic Party, which is what the leadership of the NEA and the AFT did. They all mobilized in the midterm elections to elect more Democrats, and now they control the House with absolutely no difference whatsoever in the politics of the nation or in the legislation or anything else. The elections in the United States serve the purpose of justifying the system. Our history has always been that during election time, the mass movements are in decline from the Vietnam War and my entire life. And that's because people believe that there's a solution in electing Democrats or Republicans or whatever. That's why we're running the election, because there's a great interest. We expect there to be a serious interest in our national campaign. But I don't feel the rise of this far right, minus increased number of small incidents of violence against workers, LGBT people, women, and others. It's minuscule in proportion to the size of the demonstrations on the other side. On Women's Day 2 years ago, we had, after the Trump inaugural, we had 5 million people in the streets who were demanding equal rights for women, abortion rights, LGBTQI rights, and every other. That's one of the biggest demonstrations in the history of the country. So I think that there is a contradictory. I don't think the American working class is moving towards any fascist solution. As far as your question, it's a tricky question. The ruling class always needs educated workers to some extent or the other to be efficient. They are the fundamental people who create the wealth in society. But in the modern era, when workers are being increasingly replaced by machines, there's less a need for skilled workers and a greater need for service workers like McDonald workers and literally hundreds of thousands who they can buy for nothing in profit. And that's why they make more money in prisons than they do in public education. And that's why they're privatizing public education. They made the system fail, they cut the money, and then they say to people, go to a private school and you get a better education. And that's why the reaction of the teachers saying, well, fund public education, smaller class size, quality education. But you can't just say that. You have to say change the lives of people. Because kids fail in the school system, not just because the schools are lousy, but because they grew up in an entire world where they have been denied equal rights, where they live in poverty, where they don't have any health care, where they can't pay the rent, and where they become victims of society. One of the things I get the biggest response from when I speak at rallies, I say, "Free Mumia Abu Jamal." Everybody says, yeah. "Free all political prisoners." Everybody says, yeah. And then I say, in remembering the French, "Free everybody in prison." And the crowd goes wild on that, because they understand that the vast numbers of people in prison are victims of this system. 70–80% are there for using, quote, illegal drugs. It's profitable to imprison people. They literally have sheriff's departments that work in collusion with judges, where they pay the judge to convict people to send them to the privatized prisons. It's a big industry, multi-billion-dollar industry. It's a classic example of a sick society. So I'm certainly not saying in a socialist society, education would be free, class size would be practically zero, everybody would become a teacher, like in Cuba. They have the highest percentage of teachers, largest percentage of PhDs, the largest percentage of doctors. Well, with the riches of our society, we could qualitatively exceed that and have that be the norm in the whole world.
Okay, Jeff, you're way over time. Enough is enough. Okay, Aurelian's next.
About the rise of the far right. I think it's a consequence of the capitalist policies with misery, unemployment, and the reactionary discourses about immigrants in France. All the parties, including Mélenchon, they have all an horrible discourse about immigrants. But I think the rise of the far right is a consequence of the defeat, of the failures of the labor movement. Labor movement is unable to prove it can stop the capitalist policies. During the Yellow Jackets movement, a few far-right groups try to build themselves. It's a new step for the far-right, because the Rassemblement National is the most important party in the vote since 2014. But the Rassemblement National is, for the moment, an institutional party. It's not an activist party. And with the Yellow Jacket mobilization, for the first time since years, far-right groups try to build activist groups. They try to build activist groups in the street. So this is why they try to attack the procession of the new anti-capitalist party in Paris, Toulouse, etc. So they try to show they can organize activist mobilization. And this was possible because Yellow Jacket mobilization fundamentally is a populist movement. And this is possible because the flag of the Yellow Jacket is not the red flag, it's not a class flag. It's a tricolor, it is the tricolor flag of the French Republic, of the bourgeois republic. The Yellow Jacket don't speak about the working class. They speak about French people. So I think this is why the far right can have a large echo inside the Yellow Jacket mobilization. But this is, I'm not saying that all the Yellow Jackets are from far right. It's not true. Many of Yellow Jackets are workers. Many of Yellow Jackets are used. They want to fight against the government, and this is why we must go inside the demonstrations on Saturday. But we must intervene with a class discourse, with a class program. Je réponds juste en français pour le camarade et après je vais essayer de... I try to translate next. C'est ça que j'essaie d'expliquer quand on parle de réveiller la conscience ouvrière, la conscience de classe. Au sein du mouvement des Gilets jaunes, on essaie justement de combattre cette orientation populiste et de dire que notre drapeau, c'est pas le drapeau tricolore, notre peuple, c'est pas le peuple français, parce que nous, on intervient en tant que classe sociale, et que notre drapeau, c'est le drapeau rouge, et que notre camp, c'est celui des travailleurs. C'est ça qu'on essaie de combattre, et de mettre en avant aussi des revendications qui ne soient pas seulement des revendications démocratiques, mais qui soient des revendications de classe, sur le salaire, sur la remise en cause du pouvoir des patrons dans les entreprises et sur la nécessité de la grève générale. So I explain that when we go in the Yellow Jacket demonstration, we explain that the people, it's not our words. We speak about working class. We speak about red flag, and we try to speak about claims, class claims about wages against the bosses, the employers, and we try to explain the need of the general strike and the need of unity of the working class.
Sit so I can save time. The first one I'm going to address is that we have been in touch with folks from Quebec. There are a little unique differences between organizing in Quebec and Ontario, but we've been trying to learn as many lessons as possible so we could apply it to our context. But folks have been really, really helpful there, and I'm like excited to continue working with them because you folks sort of paved the way, but there are also differences that we have to account for. So that's that. I feel like like your question, Julius, and like your question around relationship building are connected. In terms of like leadership, not, I would say, doing their jobs. It's, as somebody who has been elected, you're always trying to balance the members who are ahead of the game and want to strive to that world that you've envisioned and see, and how to bring everybody else along who hasn't gotten to that point. And it's always a difficult challenge, but that's why I think that it's really important that we elect leadership that share those priorities and can be the ones on the ground with you, building people into that conversation. I think with the Federation, what's been difficult with the CFS in particular is that I want to be here, but I still have to bring everyone along with me. And if our locals aren't strong, our federation can't be strong. So it's like, how do I ensure that our member locals, our elected leaders on the ground are the ones pushing that work and bringing people along? And there are times when it's difficult. And like I mentioned with student unions that we've lost to right-wing, like flat out just like campus conservatives, it's a really difficult time when you haven't built structures outside of that students' union. And I think a lot of the work that we've been doing is building outside of those and not looking to elected leaders to do the work for us. Because at the end of the day, when their members push ahead, they have no choice but to follow those members. And that's actually how we won the referendum at Carleton, where it was actually organizing general members, even though their elected representatives wanted to leave the Federation, and at the end of the day, they voted to stay members. You cannot tell your members, no, I'm not going to do what you tell me to do. At the end of the day, the elected folks have to do what their members say. So I think when we organize the general membership, that's the best part. And we've seen this with student unions that aren't part of the Federation, who are asking their student unions, saying, why aren't you doing work around these OSAP cuts? Why aren't you doing work around the Student Choice Initiative? They do that work instead, and their elected reps have no choice but to follow. And then they either get elected again and do the work, or they don't get elected, and that's okay. We should be electing people who carry the priorities of the membership. But what that goes into, I think, is also what types of relationship are we building with members and non-members, organized labor and non-organized labor, or just general people. Like, some of the things that I've heard is that people love Ford because even when it's not an election, he's in the community. Are our elected reps in doing the work on the ground? Probably not. And we need to be asking ourselves, why are they not there? When I think about relationship building, it's hard to build a relationship with somebody who you think you don't agree with, but there is always something that we could actually agree on. And one thing I would never say is don't go and try to, I'm not going to go debate my humanity. I'm not going to go talk to somebody who doesn't believe Muslims have a right to be in this country, who don't believe I have a right to living in all these things. But those are tough conversations that I could probably switch out with a team. And I think that's what my team has been trying to do, is how do we have those tough conversations? How do we have debates? How do we meet people where they're at? How do we not come to them and think that we're better than them? And I think that happens a lot, where people are like, I'm more left than you, so I'm better than you. And that's scary, and that's not good, because that's not how we build movements. And I'm not saying anyone in this room does that. That's not what I'm saying. But the reality is, I've had those experiences where once upon a time, I probably did something messed up. Flat out, I didn't come out of the womb knowing everything right. But somebody had the patience with me to teach me, and I think we need to have the patience to teach others and to bring them along and understand why they feel the way they do. That's something the right does very well. They make everyone feel like they're a part of something larger. Like, I know what you're going through. And we need to take the time to get to know each other. Sometimes I remember when I was training for my election, my campaign managers were like, spend 2 minutes and move on to the next person. Why? Because it's an election mode and you need to keep going on to the next person. But the reality is, if I'm spending 2 minutes talking to someone, I don't know what their issues are. I don't know who they are. How do I build that relationship? So it's really about going out there and building those relationships.
30 seconds.
Thank you. It's being in that community. And that goes to, who are we electing? How are we making sure they know our issues? How do we make sure that they're pushing ahead? That way they know that actually when you're going and pushing the status quo, you actually have a whole bunch of people behind you, and you're not going to get left out to dry. So,
That's
thank
exactly
you.
what this workshop is.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a speakers list. We have 4 people on it. The hour is 10 to 6, and we have another one at 7, and we got to come back to the panel again. So sorry, folks, but yes, I got you, John. I have the 4 speakers, and I'm going to have to close the list. So, and then we will come back to the panel and let them wrap up. So stay around. I'm sure you have a lot of other questions, and one of these sessions ties into the other, so you'll get it out one time or another.
Where do we have dinner?
Okay. I don't know. I guess wherever you wish.
I thought there was a 5-course meal being served.
No, sorry. That's by invitation only, and you weren't included, sister. Good for you. Good for you.
La révolution commence à la table
Okay.
de cuisine.
All right. Okay. So moving right along, we have Gary.
Let me say first of all that I spent 15 years on the board of the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan as an appointee of the Ontario Teachers Federation.
Louder.
And they owned the Toronto Raptors. So I'm very, very, very partisan toward the Raptors.
Yeah, Jeff.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the view of education that we had back in the student power days. This was shortly after the assassination of Julius Caesar. I was at Carleton actually, and we had a big discussion about what is the real role of education. Do we simply want to serve the capitalist class and be trained for what they want us to be, or do we really want to do an investigation into the nature of the society in which we were born and raised and have to spend the rest of our lives? And so the result of that was that we called for student power, that we wanted student representatives to help decide the priorities of the entire university. And the other thing that we said was, we want the war recruiters off the campus. We don't want these people coming to buy us into their system of killing people around the world so they can exploit the resources and cheap labor for their profit. So I guess I'm asking, is there anything like that kind of discussion happening now on the campuses? I mean, what you're talking about is the struggle to survive, the student unions, but that is bound to raise other questions. Why are we having to struggle to survive? And I think you have a start at an answer, but the more fundamental issue is you live in a capitalist society, and you've got to think about what you're going to do about that. So that's...
Okay, you can stay right behind Gary to Hans.
Oh my God, I'm going to ask a nasty question of Jeff, and now that we're reminiscing, I remember in November or Christmas time, 1962, on the south side of Chicago, being recruited to serious radical socialism by none other than Pete Camejo, who I regarded and still regard as probably one of the most dynamic, outgoing leaders of revolutionary socialism in America. This is a low blow, Jeff. How do you comment on that self-same Pete Camejo after the implosion of the SWP, and by the way, now the ECHO, the ISO implosion? How do you comment on him running as vice presidential running mate for Ralph Nader for the quote-unquote bourgeois Green Party?
Leave it to Hans. Okay, Kurt.
Hi, my name is Kurt Young. I'm a picket captain for the Local 30 Sheet Metal Workers Union. And we've gone on strike for months now, and the strike is not just to get a good raise, but it's been about us being able to maintain a quality of work, quality of life, job safety, and issues that pertain to us maintaining our, our work, being able to secure our work for the future. And it's been a tough strike because one of the reasons being that we have a lot of apathetic members. Actually, on our first day, we only had 10% of the membership show up on picket lines and actually be active. And another reason is because of the type of leadership we have. And I'll speak to one of the incidents we've had is regarding Bill 66. Bill 66 is an omnibus bill that was passed by the Ford government back in March, I believe. And it contained a lot of provisions that were harmful to many people, and one of those provisions was harmful to labor, in which they stated that any non-construction company was not obligated to observe collective agreements. Okay, so every union wanted to fight this. Every member who knew about this wanted to fight this. Now the COBT, bit self-serving, decided that they weren't going to fight this because they believed it wouldn't affect them specifically, only this law, even though several of the other provisions would affect them somehow, but it was only this one they were concerned with. And they decided to tell us not to fight this bill based on the fact that the Toronto City Council decided to vote that they weren't going to adopt that particular provision.
30 seconds.
But that vote that they made was a non-binding resolution. So now that the bill has been passed and we have a non-binding resolution, that means absolutely nothing, and this bill can possibly be enforced within the Toronto region, and all of the laborers who work for the city in some capacity will no longer be able to work under our collective agreement. They're telling us to now petition our city council members, as we could have been fighting this from the moment of its inception.
Tell them your strike is growing, the plumbers are out now.
Oh, and another thing, yes. So after a month of being out, the plumbers wanted to go out with us.
Yeah.
Our members, unfortunately, their bosses have been inept as well and pushing back the strike, but thankfully, last night, we were informed that the plumbers will be going out with us.
Jono?
Leave like that.
Okay, my question's for Aurelian. I'm trying to get a picture what these yellow jackets are all about. You've described them in several ways, but one way we can figure out what they're all about is, what are their issues? What are their demands? What are they wanting? I believe there's a gas tax. I believe there's something about changes to work benefits, vacations, some type of Macron omnibus bill that he brought in. What are they out on the streets for weekend after weekend? What are they fighting for? That describes, in many ways, what they are.
Okay, we're going to go back to the panel, and each of them have 4 minutes for wrap up, and we're going to start with Aurelian, and then Noor, and then Jeff.
I try to answer to your question, but it's a little difficult, because the demands of the yellow jackets are very confused. In fact, it's very confused. At the beginning, the main claim of the yellow jacket was about the gas tax. But quickly, the personality of Macron, so all the anger of the people was against Macron. And the main claim of the yellow jacket was Macron, we come at your home to get you, and it was this. So and it's a little difficult, because it's a very political claim, but this is very personal, and there is no class consciousness. Yes. So this last month, the main claim of the yellow jacket was about referendum issue. They claim that about different questions, the government organized a referendum. So you understand? And so it's a democratic claim. It's a bourgeois democratic claim, and we try to fight this this claim, because we think that we must fight against the government. We must fight against Macron. But behind Macron, it's against the employers, the bosses, etc. So, but so I think it's a little difficult to say what is the claim of the Yellow Jacket. It's because the Yellow Jacket mobilization is very heterogeneous.
Reactionary.
You have reactionary ideas, but you have trade unionists who go in the streets on Saturday and fight against the police because they think that the policy of the bureaucratic leadership trade unions is inefficient during the strikes. So this is the Yellow Jacket movement. And this is why I think the greatest weakness of the radical left is her inability to build a class poll, to regroup themselves. So after the attack of the NPA by the far right in Paris, different leftist organizations meet themselves and they try to build this class poll, but it was a little late. So
30 seconds.
And I finish with this. I think the Yellow Jacket movement show that in our situation we must also think about the military question, because when our demonstrations are attacked by the police, when we are attacked by the far right, we are forced to organize our protections. And I think it's a very important question, because the anarchists, the Black Bloc, they have a very large echo in the youth and in the inside the Yellow Jacket movement, because they organized the fight against the police, and the labor movement is unable to organize the fight against the police. It's a very important question to organize this, and so I think we must organize our self-protection and to organize the fight against the repression of the government. It's a very important question, because if we don't organize this, it's a risk for radicalization on the right, I think.
So, in terms of your question, yeah, we do talk a lot about making sure that there's student representation, to make sure that any decisions that the institution makes are reflective of student issues. When we're talking about war, that's actually the reason I got involved in my students' union, talking about divestment and so forth. But I will say that it's not like when the anti-war movement was in its peak. And that's the reality, is that there has been a shift to, neoliberalism and thinking about yourself and only worry about yourself and getting through that 4-year degree and get out. So a lot of the difficulties in organizing students on campus is that they are commuters, they have multiple responsibilities. How much time are they actually spending on campus, and do they think it's worth getting involved while compromising a job so they could pay off their tuition, while being able to commute 2 hours home after a 9 o'clock meeting ends, or whatever it may be. But a lot of members across maybe like the past 5 years have been focusing on sexual violence and harassment, mental health resources, challenging racism, anti-corporatization, and divestment, particularly with fossil fuels, and talking about climate justice and so forth. But I would say that it was funny because Carleton is actually one of my favorite, I shouldn't have favorites, but Carleton is actually one of my favorite campuses. And there was one conversation I was having with a student about, membership in the Federation and all the work that we do. And they're like, well, what is it like, what will it do for me? I'm like, okay, Yes, 100%. But what will we do for everybody as well? And it's when we don't have a strong local on the ground raising that consciousness with members, I can't be in 38 different places all at once. And that's the difficulty, where I need a strong local to be talking about these issues and how, the war movement is, all of these things are intertwined, but if that's not a conversation day in and day out, it's not going to be a conversation that a campus will have, which is the unfortunate situation. Where did he go? Oh, there you are, sorry. I'm so excited to hear about the strike and how it's growing. You brought up the issue about apathy, and I wanted to ask why. Why are people apathetic? And the reason that I mentioned that is, do people, like when I've run into apathetic students who are, being like, what about me? Like, a lot of people say, I don't think it's possible. If they think it's not possible, then that means we're not talking about our victories enough. If they're saying, oh, I'm a commuter, I can't stay on campus, that means I need to go back and think about transit. And how am I making sure that students have access to accessible transit? And what routes are not working for them and what routes need to work for them? When students aren't going out to vote, why aren't you voting? Okay, that means we need on-campus polling stations. So when I think of apathy, like it's actually a really difficult thing to talk about, but I want to dig down and understand, why are people apathetic and what can I do to eradicate that? Because to me, when people are apathetic, it means somebody hasn't injected enough hope, and that's not on you. That's not saying you haven't done, you haven't brought about hope, but it means that as a collective, we need to be doing that and making sure people understand that, like, we actually have that power to change. And when your leadership isn't organizing, I'm so sorry to hear that. That's so crap. That they waited so long to realize actually we need to do something about it. And what I say to that is, there's more people like you than not, so we need to just out-organize the leadership and show them, like, screw you. So if there's anything I can do to help, just let me know. I'd be happy to help. Thanks. Oh, over here.
Okay, Jeff.
When I was in Chicago, they let me speak for 3 hours.
Listen, the only person that was ever allowed to do that in my book is already gone, and that was Fidel. So nobody else did. Sorry, Jeff.
Well, the question we're all grappling with, and even the title of the panel, Workers' Revolt, when are we going to get there? And I think that Brian had an answer, and we all have an answer, and that is this: we are in a period where there are accumulating grievances that affect the consciousness of working people. And they're angry. They don't feel secure in their lives, in their future, in their ability. The 2008 crisis, tens of thousands, millions of people lost their home, couldn't pay their mortgages, lost their life savings. They're angry at what capitalism has done to them, and how they express that anger, and when they do, is the question that we're all grappling with. Right now, we're in a period where there's an interest in socialist ideas of building our party with the best cadre that we can, is central. If we don't recruit a layer of young people like the ones in this room, and old people who remember Julius Caesar. And by the way, Gary, Peter was one of the first persons I met in the party and recruited me over the Cuban Revolution. And he was a wonderful young comrade and presidential candidate in 1976. And then, to really answer your question, I go back to Jim Cannon, who was the founder of the, along with a Canadian comrade who attended the World Congress. What's his name?
Maurice Spector.
Yeah, Maurice Spector. Jim had to assess his lifetime experience in the revolutionary movement. And he said a lot of things that had a profound effect on me. First, he said, if I ever get a medal for any contribution for my role in the revolutionary movement, it won't be for any great achievement, it'll be for all the shit I had to listen to. And he said that 75% of his time was in faction fights. But the faction fights inside our historic movement are not just because people like to fight, it's because of tremendous pressures in the world capitalist system on small revolutionary parties that don't have deep roots. And the absence of deep roots is not because we're lousy organizers, but it's qualitatively more because capitalism has been able, after it killed 80 million people in World War II, to reach a period of relative stability, which it did from 1945 on till 1975, 1980. And now that system is facing a crisis that it has no solutions to other than on us. So, like we saw with the teachers and the government workers that didn't get paid, and like we will see over and over again, we can expect fightbacks, but we never know exactly where they're coming. But if we are integrated in the social movements, trying to rebuild the movements, so there is no substitution for building movements, including worker centers. People say, well, worker centers are better than unions. Unions are the elementary organization of working people that the bosses force them to come to defend their interests. And it requires revolutionary leadership like it did in the 30s. Our comrades led the Minneapolis strike with class struggle methods, 1934, and it paved the way for the CIO. Capitalism creates the condition for the rise of working people. The critical question why we're here today is what kind of leadership is necessary to take them in the next step. That is not ultra-left, but talks to them in their own language,
Teachers.
and operates under the principle, an injury to one is an injury to all. So for example, imagine if the construction trades in Los Angeles, when Latino workers closed down the entire suburban construction industry, and they appealed to the white racist construction worker union to help. They didn't, until they finally realized that they had to organize, and so they allowed them into the union. The Latino workers were 100% Latino, who didn't have union contracts. So as soon as they got into the union, the bureaucracy gave them the shaft and put them in a seniority system where the white workers had all seniority and the new workers had nothing. So they learned a lesson on the bureaucracy, and I could give you 1,000 examples of the betrayal of the bureaucracy. But for every betrayal, which we've experienced through much of our lives, it's going to be an example of some who say no, or some who set the example. And that example will be set in a context. When Rosa Parks said, "I won't move to the back of the bus," it wasn't that she was some heroic figure. It was that she reflected, as did Dr. King, she reflected a deep sentiment in the movement against tolerating this racist society. And it's the same thing with students. The one or few who rise up at the right time with the right preparation, the right words, the right explanation, who catch the current that is existing, will end up being among the central leaders of the future movement. So our comrades in Minneapolis closed down a whole city for Teamsters, and when a group of women who were working in making candy, when they went to the union, they just closed down that job until the women had a contract, and everybody in Minneapolis had a contract, made it a union town. The same thing at the San Francisco general strike. LA is very weak in unions. San Francisco, because they had a general strike, because they have this percentage of union in the state. It's the same thing with every struggle. And we just have to be part of it and build it piece by piece. And sometimes we're going to get a big piece. Sometimes 2, 3, 5 are going to join, and then 10. I spoke to 15 people at University of California at Santa Cruz. They were interested in revolutionary socialist ideas. Started with Bumia Abu-Jamal. We're trying to recruit 15 once. Peter, to answer your question.
Really, Jeff? You're already gone 6 minutes. And it's only 45 minutes till the next session, so you have 1 minute.
All right, 1 minute, thanks. Peter Kameo was an outstanding revolutionary who got burned out and ended up not only, when he quit the SWP, he formed the North Star Collective, which supported Democrats in Berkeley. And then he supported the COC, which is the Gorbachev split in the Communist Party, and raised money. Then he went into the stock market and became a millionaire, made an awful lot of money. And then then he joined the Green Party, just shifted from 4 parties. He had a lot of money and he could get on the ballot. So he was not immune to the pressures of the time. When I look at you, especially the old people, because you've made it through one lifetime of struggle and you're still here to educate these young people who are going to be the future leaders of the American Revolution. And that combination of old and you, guys like you, Caesar, you are the embodiment of what we fought for our entire lives. And all the other older comrades, we've learned some lessons that we have to teach. That's why we're here. And that's why the youth are here and growing. So that combination of the new generation and the old, in our time, in my time, we're going to make a socialist revolution. And this damn conference is a great start.
Okay, so thank you very much. A special thanks to our panel. Thank you, Nora. Okay, so thanks to Comrade Mackler, Jeff Mackler, and the Golden Warriors. We now only have about 45 minutes before the next session. But anyway, go Raptors, go.